Jake Morrison stood in the massive hallway of the Galactic Council station and tried not to let his jaw drop. The ceiling stretched so high above him that he could barely see where it ended. Strange lights that looked like floating stars drifted through the air, casting rainbow colors on the walls. Everything was made of some kind of smooth metal that seemed to glow from within. Ambassador Lisa Grant walked beside him, her diplomatic uniform perfectly pressed and her face showing the calm mask she had practiced for months. She carried a small briefcase that contained all of humanity's hopes for joining the galactic community. Behind them, Security Chief Danny Rodriguez kept his eyes moving constantly, watching for any signs of trouble. Lieutenant Amy Walsh brought up the rear, her hand never straying far from her weapon. They had been traveling for 3 days to reach this place, and Jake still could not believe they were actually here. 6 months ago, he had been a regular space captain running cargo between Earth and the Mars colonies. Then first contact happened and everything changed. The aliens had been watching humanity for decades, waiting to see if they would develop faster than light travel on their own. When they finally did, the invitation to join the Galactic Council had arrived within a week. The hallway was filled with beings that looked like they had stepped out of a science fiction movie. Some walked on 2 legs like humans, others slithered on snake-like bodies, and still others floated through the air without any visible means of support. Their skin came in every color Jake could imagine, and several he was sure he had never seen before. Some had fur, others had scales, and a few seemed to be made of living crystal. Most of them ignored the human delegation completely. A few stared openly, their alien eyes studying the newcomers with obvious curiosity. Jake heard whispers in languages that sounded like nothing he had ever heard before. Even with the translation device in his ear working overtime to make sense of it all, Lisa had warned him about this. Earth had made contact with the galactic community less than a year ago, making humans the newest species to apply for membership. Most of the other races had been part of the council for hundreds or even thousands of years. To them, humans were babies taking their first steps into a much larger universe. The council chamber itself was even more impressive than the hallway. It was shaped like a giant bowl, with rows of seats rising up in circles around a central speaking platform. Each section seemed designed for different types of beings. Some seats were filled with water for aquatic species, others glowed with heat for creatures that needed higher temperatures, and a few sections were kept in complete darkness for beings that could not tolerate light. Jake counted at least 200 different species represented in the chamber. Each one had earned their place through centuries of technological advancement, diplomatic skill, and cultural development. Now humanity was asking to join this exclusive club after barely 50 years of space travel. The human delegation took their assigned seats in a section marked for carbon-based bipedal species. The chairs were surprisingly comfortable, though Jake noticed they were positioned in one of the lower sections, clearly marking them as the least important beings in the room. Lisa seemed to notice this too, but she kept her expression neutral. Speaker Veltar called the session to order. He was a being made of what looked like living crystal, standing over 3 meters tall and glowing with a soft blue light. His voice resonated through the chamber without any need for amplification, somehow reaching every corner of the vast space. The first part of the meeting was all ceremony and tradition. Various representatives stood to give formal greetings in their ancient languages. Jake found himself struggling to stay awake as delegate after delegate spoke about honor, wisdom, and the sacred bonds of galactic civilization. The translation device did its best, but some concepts seemed to have no equivalent in human language. Finally, Speaker Veltar announced that the Assembly would now consider humanity's application for membership in the Galactic Council. Lisa stood and walked down to the central platform, her briefcase in hand. She had practiced this speech hundreds of times, and Jake knew she could give it perfectly even if someone woke her up in the middle of the night. She began by thanking the Council for the opportunity to speak. She talked about humanity's rapid technological development, their commitment to peace and cooperation, and their eagerness to learn from the wisdom of older civilizations. She mentioned Earth's diverse cultures, their achievements in science, And art and their potential contributions to galactic society? Jake thought she was doing brilliantly. Her voice was clear and confident, her arguments were logical and well presented, and she managed to strike exactly the right tone between humble respect and quiet pride. Several delegates seemed to be listening with genuine interest, and Jake began to feel hopeful that this might actually work. Then Counselor Zephan rose to speak. Jake had read about Zephan in the briefing materials. He was the representative of the Hegemony Coalition, one of the oldest and most powerful groups in the galaxy. His species looked like a cross between a snake and a dragon, with scales that shifted color based on his mood and 4 arms that moved independently of each other. He was known for his intelligence, his political skill, and his complete lack of patience for species he considered inferior. When Zephan spoke, his words were polite on the surface but carried an edge that made Jake's skin crawl. He began by acknowledging humanity's enthusiasm and their rapid development, but then he started asking questions that felt more like accusations. Why had humanity developed weapons before they developed medicine? Why did they still have wars on their home planet? Why did they seem so eager to expand into space when they had not yet solved the problems in their own backyard? Each question came with a slight smile that somehow made it feel like an insult. Lisa answered each question calmly and professionally, but Jake could see the tension building in her shoulders. She explained that human development had been uneven, but that they were working to improve. She pointed out that many species had gone through similar growing pains in their early history. She emphasized humanity's recent achievements in peacekeeping and environmental restoration, but Zephan was not finished. He began to compare humanity to other species that had applied for membership in the past. Some had been rejected for being too aggressive, others for being too primitive, and still others for lacking the wisdom necessary to participate in galactic civilization. As he spoke, Jake began to realize that this was not a genuine question and answer session. This was a setup. Other delegates began to join in, their questions becoming more pointed and their tone more condescending. They spoke about humanity's short lifespan, their emotional instability, and their tendency toward violence. They questioned whether a species that had only recently learned to travel between stars could possibly have anything valuable to offer to a community that had been exploring the galaxy for millennia. Jake felt his hands clenching into fists. Lisa continued to respond with perfect diplomatic calm, but he could see the fire building in her eyes. Around the chamber, he noticed that Danny and Amy had both gone very still, the kind of stillness that came before action. The aliens had no idea what they were about to unleash. The attacks on humanity continued for what felt like hours. Jake watched from his seat as delegate after delegate stood up to question everything about human civilization. They spoke in calm, measured tones that somehow made their words cut deeper than any shouting would have. The representative from the Quillari Collective was next to speak. She was a tall, thin being with skin that looked like polished silver and eyes that had no pupils. When she moved, her body seemed to flow like liquid metal. Her voice was soft and musical, which made her words even more insulting. She talked about humanity's military history like it was something shameful. She mentioned every war humans had ever fought, from ancient battles with swords and spears to modern conflicts with advanced weapons. She spoke about the millions of people who had died in these wars as if it proved that humans were too violent to join civilized society. Lisa responded by explaining that humans had learned from their mistakes. She pointed out that Earth had not seen a major war in over 30 years and that humanity was committed to peaceful expansion into space. She mentioned the United Earth Federation and how it had brought together all the different nations and cultures of Earth under one government, but the Quillari representative was not satisfied. She asked why humans still maintained military forces if they were truly peaceful. She wanted to know why human colonies were protected by armed ships and why human explorers carried weapons. When they traveled to new worlds, Jake felt his jaw tighten as he listened to this. Of course, humans carried weapons when they explored unknown territory. Any species with half a brain would do the same thing. The galaxy was full of dangerous creatures and hostile environments. not carrying weapons. Would be stupid, not peaceful. The next speaker was even worse. The representative from the Ethereal Syndicate was a being of pure energy contained within a transparent shell. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, making it impossible to ignore. This delegate attacked human science and technology. It claimed that human understanding of physics was primitive, and that their technology was crude compared to what the advanced species had developed. It pointed out that humans had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel, while other species had been using it for thousands of years. The energy being spoke about human achievements in space exploration like they were the fumbling attempts of children playing with toys. It described human colonies as small and poorly planned compared to the massive cities that other species had built on alien worlds. It even criticized human art and culture, claiming that it lacked the sophistication and depth found in truly advanced civilizations. Lisa tried to defend human achievements, but Jake could see that she was getting frustrated. She talked about how quickly humans had developed their technology and how much they had accomplished in such a short time. She mentioned human creativity and adaptability, pointing out that these qualities had helped humanity survive and thrive on Earth, but the delegates were not interested in hearing about human potential. They wanted to focus on human limitations. Another representative stood up, this one from a species that looked like walking plants with bark-like skin and leaves instead of hair. This being spoke about human biology like it was a design flaw. It pointed out that humans had short lifespans compared to most galactic species. While some aliens lived for thousands of years, humans rarely made it past 100. The plant-like being suggested that this made humans too short-sighted to make good decisions about long-term galactic policy. It also criticized human reproduction rates. Humans had children frequently and in large numbers compared to species that might reproduce once every few centuries. The delegate implied that this showed humans were driven by primitive biological urges rather than rational thought. Jake felt his anger building as he listened to this nonsense. Human reproduction rates were one of their greatest strengths, not a weakness. It meant that humanity could recover from disasters and adapt to new situations faster than species that took centuries to replace their population. The worst part was that some of the other delegates were actually laughing. Jake could hear strange sounds coming from different parts of the chamber that the translation device interpreted as amusement. These ancient, supposedly wise beings were treating humanity like a joke. The attacks continued to get more personal. A delegate from the Dominion stood up to speak, and Jake immediately knew this was going to be bad. The Dominion was known for their arrogance and their belief that they were superior to all other species. Their representative was a massive creature that looked like a cross between an octopus and a spider, with multiple arms covered in sharp spines. This being spoke about humans like they were animals that had somehow learned to talk. It suggested that humanity's rapid development was actually evidence of their primitive nature. According to this delegate, truly advanced species developed slowly and carefully, taking time to consider the consequences of their actions. Only primitive species rushed headlong into space without proper preparation. The Dominion representative went on to compare humans to other species that had been rejected for council membership. It mentioned several races that had been deemed too aggressive, too unpredictable, or too dangerous to be allowed into galactic society. The implication was clear: humans belonged in the same category as these rejected species. Lisa's responses were becoming shorter and more clipped. Jake could see that she was struggling to maintain her diplomatic composure. She kept repeating the same points about human potential and their commitment to peace, but the delegates were not listening. The final insult came when Counselor Zephyr stood up again. His scales had shifted to a deep red color that Jake somehow knew meant he was enjoying himself. When he spoke, his voice carried a tone of amused condescension that made Jake's blood boil. Zephyr suggested that perhaps the Council should consider making humanity a protectorate species instead of offering them full membership. He explained that protectorate species were those that were too primitive to govern themselves but might be useful for simple tasks. They were given basic protection and guidance in exchange for providing labor and resources to more advanced civilizations. The Serpentine Counselor went on to suggest specific roles that humans might fill in galactic society. They could work in mines on dangerous worlds where their short lifespans would not be a significant loss. They could serve as soldiers in conflicts where their aggressive nature might actually be useful. They could even be used for manual labor on construction projects that required physical strength rather than intelligence. As Zephyr spoke, Jake noticed that the laughter in the chamber was getting louder. More and more delegates seemed to find the idea of humans as servants amusing. Some were even making suggestions of their own about how humanity might be put to work. Jake looked around at his team and saw that they were all having the same reaction. Danny Rodriguez had gone completely still, his eyes fixed on Zephyr with the kind of focus that meant he was calculating distances and angles. Amy Walsh had shifted her weight slightly, moving her hand closer to her weapon without seeming to do so deliberately. Even Lisa was starting to crack. Her diplomatic smile was becoming strained, and Jake could see her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the podium. She was still trying to respond professionally to each insult, but her voice was getting tighter with each word. The chamber fell silent as Zephyr finished speaking. Jake realized that this was the moment when everything would change. The aliens had pushed too far, and now they were about to discover what humans were really like when their patience finally ran out. The silence in the chamber stretched on for several long seconds before Counselor Zephyr decided to make things even worse. His scales had turned an even deeper shade of red, and Jake could see something that looked like satisfaction in his alien eyes. The Serpentine being clearly thought he had won some kind of victory by suggesting that humans should be servants rather than equals. Zephyr raised one of his forearms and gestured dismissively toward the human delegation. When he spoke, again his voice carried a tone of fake concern that fooled no one. He said that perhaps the Council was being too harsh in their judgment of humanity. After all, not every species could be expected to reach the same level of civilization and sophistication. The counselor went on to explain that there were many useful roles that less advanced species could fill in galactic society, he mentioned. Again, the mining operations on dangerous worlds, the construction projects that required physical labor, and the military conflicts where human aggression might actually be beneficial. He made it sound like he was offering humanity a generous opportunity rather than suggesting they become slaves. Several other delegates began to nod in agreement. The representative from the crystalline hegemony spoke up to support Zephon's proposal. This being looked like a walking mountain of living gems, each facet of its body reflecting the chamber's lights in different colors. Its voice sounded like wind chimes being struck by a gentle breeze. The crystal being suggested that humanity could be assigned to agricultural worlds, where their biology would be well suited to farming in harsh conditions. It pointed out that humans seemed to reproduce quickly and adapt easily to new environments, making them ideal for colonizing difficult planets that other species might find uninhabitable. Another delegate from the Void Collective joined the conversation. This creature was completely black and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When it spoke, its voice was so deep that Jake could feel it vibrating in his chest. The being suggested that humans might be useful for exploring dangerous regions of space where more valuable species should not risk their lives. Jake felt something cold and hard settle in his stomach as he listened to these suggestions. These aliens were not just insulting humanity anymore. They were seriously discussing turning his entire species into a slave labor force. They were talking about humans like they were tools to be used and discarded when they were no longer needed. He looked at Lisa and saw that her diplomatic mask was finally starting to slip. Her face had gone pale, and her hands were gripping the podium so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She was still trying to maintain her professional composure, but Jake could see the fury building in her eyes. Lisa cleared her throat and attempted to respond to the latest round of insults. She spoke about human dignity and the right of all intelligent species to determine their own destiny. She tried to explain that humanity was not seeking charity or protection from the galactic community, but rather the opportunity to contribute as equals. But the delegates were not interested in hearing about human rights or dignity. They had clearly made up their minds about what humans were good for, and they were not going to be swayed by arguments about equality or fairness. The representative from the Aquatic Federation rose from its water-filled section to speak. This being looked like a cross between a dolphin and an octopus, with smooth blue skin and multiple tentacles that moved gracefully through the water. Its voice was translated as having a musical quality that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. The aquatic delegate suggested that humans might be particularly well suited for underwater construction projects. It pointed out that human biology allowed them to hold their breath for extended periods and that their physical strength would be useful for building structures in deep ocean environments on various worlds. Jake felt his anger reaching a boiling point as he listened to this. These aliens were not just insulting humanity anymore. They were dividing up his species like they were discussing livestock at a market. Each delegate seemed to have their own ideas about how humans could best serve their particular needs. The worst part was that they were all speaking in the same calm, reasonable tones they had used throughout the session. They were not shouting or being obviously hostile. They were discussing the enslavement of humanity with the same casual politeness they might use to talk about the weather. Danny Rodriguez had been standing perfectly still for the past 10 minutes, but Jake could see the tension building in his security chief's shoulders. Danny was a veteran of several conflicts, and Jake knew that the man had very strong opinions about slavery and forced labor. The fact that he was managing to keep his mouth shut was a testament to his discipline, but Jake could see that even Danny's patience had limits. Amy Walsh was having her own struggles with self-control. The young lieutenant had moved her hand even closer to her weapon, and Jake could see her eyes tracking the positions of the alien delegates who were speaking. She was automatically calculating fields of fire and potential threats, even though they were supposed to be in a diplomatic setting. Lisa made one more attempt to steer the conversation back towards civilized discussion. She spoke about the Universal Declaration of Sentient Rights, a document that supposedly guaranteed the freedom and dignity of all intelligent species in the galaxy. She pointed out that the proposals being discussed would violate every principle that the Galactic Council claimed to support, but Counselor Zephan was ready for this argument. He dismissed the declaration as a document that applied only to member species of the Council. Since humanity was not yet a member, and since they were apparently not qualified for membership, the protections of the declaration did not apply to them. The Serpentine Counselor went on to explain that there were many species in the galaxy that existed in various states of servitude to more advanced civilizations. He claimed that this was simply the natural order of things, and that humanity should be grateful for the opportunity to serve rather than being left to struggle alone in the darkness between the stars. This was the moment when everything changed. Jake heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was the sound of Liza Grant, career diplomat and professional peacemaker. Finally losing her temper, she slammed her hand down on the podium with enough force to make the entire structure shake. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot, and every delegate in the room turned to stare at her in shock. Her face had gone from pale to bright red, and when she spoke, her voice was shaking with barely controlled rage. Lisa told Counselor Zephan exactly what she thought of his proposal and his species in language that would have made a space marine blush. She used words that Jake was not sure the translation devices could properly convert, but somehow the meaning came through crystal clear in every language in the chamber. The aliens stared at her in stunned silence. They had never seen a human lose control before, and they had no idea what they were witnessing. To them, Lisa's outburst was probably just an emotional tantrum from a primitive species that could not handle civilized discussion, but Jake knew better. He had seen Lisa Grant handle the most difficult negotiations with perfect calm and professionalism. If she was losing her temper, it meant that something fundamental had shifted in the human delegation. The time for diplomacy was over. Jake stood up slowly and looked around the chamber at all the alien faces staring at him. He could see confusion, amusement, and contempt in their expressions. They thought they had won, They thought they had successfully put the upstart humans in their place. They had no idea what was about to happen next. Jake Morrison stood up from his seat, and every eye in the chamber turned toward him. The aliens had been expecting another diplomatic response, perhaps an apology for Lisa's outburst or a plea for understanding. What they got instead was something they had never seen before from a human. Jake's voice was calm and quiet when he spoke, but somehow it carried to every corner of the massive chamber. He did not shout or raise his voice at all. Instead, he spoke with the kind of deadly certainty that made even the translation devices seem to pause before converting his words. He said that he had been listening to the discussion for several hours now, and he wanted to make sure he understood what was being proposed. He asked Counselor Zephyr to confirm that the Galactic Council was seriously suggesting that humanity should become a slave species to serve the needs of more advanced civilizations. Zephyr's scales shifted to a brighter red as he responded. The Serpentine being seemed pleased that Jake was finally acknowledging what he saw as the obvious solution to the human problem. He explained that the term slave was too harsh and that humanity would be better described as a protected species. Working under the guidance of their betters, Jake nodded slowly as if he was considering this explanation. He asked several more questions about the specifics of what would be expected from humanity under this arrangement. Would humans be allowed to choose their own work assignments, or would they be assigned wherever they were needed? Would human families be kept together, or would they be separated based on their usefulness? Would humans be allowed to own property, or would everything belong to their alien supervisors? The answers to these questions made it clear that the aliens were indeed proposing slavery, no matter what polite words they used to describe it. Humans would work where they were told to work, live where they were told to live, and do what they were told to do. They would have no rights, no freedom, and no say in their own destiny. Jake listened to all of this with the same calm expression he had worn throughout the entire session. But something in his eyes was changing. The polite mask that he had been wearing for hours was starting to slip, and what was underneath was something that made several of the alien delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. When the questions were finished, Jake turned to look at his team. Danny Rodriguez was standing with his arms crossed, his face showing the kind of cold anger that came before violence. Amy Walsh had her hand resting openly on her weapon now, no longer trying to hide her readiness to act. Even Lisa had stopped trying to look diplomatic and was staring at the aliens with open hatred. Jake turned back to face the chamber and spoke in the same quiet voice he had been using. He said that he wanted to thank the council for being so honest about their intentions. It was good to know exactly where humanity stood in their estimation and what kind of future they had planned for his species. He went on to explain that the human delegation had come to the station with hopes of joining the galactic community. As equals, they had prepared speeches about cooperation and mutual benefit. They had brought gifts and offers of friendship. They had even been willing to start as junior members and work their way up to full status over time. But now that they understood what the aliens really thought of humanity, Jake said that it was time for the humans to be equally honest about their own capabilities and intentions. He said that the council seemed to have some serious misconceptions about what humans were willing to accept and what they were capable of doing when pushed too far. Jake called out to Danny without turning around. He asked his security chief to remind him about the weapon systems on their ship. Danny's voice was perfectly professional when he responded, but there was an edge to it that made several aliens reach for their own communication devices. Danny reported that the human ship was currently positioned 200,000 kilometers from the station with full weapon systems online. They had targeting solutions locked onto 17 council vessels and the station's main power core. All weapons were loaded and ready to fire on command. The chamber erupted in shocked chittering and clicking as the aliens realized that the humans had come to their peaceful diplomatic meeting with enough firepower to destroy everyone in attendance. Several delegates began shouting in their native languages, demanding to know how the humans had been allowed to bring weapons to a diplomatic gathering, but Jake was not finished. He called out to Amy and asked her to explain the human concept of mutually assured destruction. Amy's voice was cheerful and conversational as she explained that humans had developed the philosophy during their early nuclear age. The basic idea was that if someone threatened to destroy you, the appropriate response was to make sure that you could destroy them right back. She went on to explain that the human ship was equipped with enough nuclear warheads to reduce the entire station to radioactive debris. She mentioned that they also had antimatter torpedoes, plasma cannons, and something called kinetic bombardment systems that could accelerate chunks of metal to significant fractions of light speed. Jake nodded approvingly at this report and then turned his attention back to Counselor Zephan. The serpentine being's scales had turned a sickly yellow color, and his forearms were gesturing frantically as he tried to contact his own security forces. Jake explained that humans had a simple philosophy when it came to dealing with threats. If someone wanted to be friends, humans were happy to be friends. If someone wanted to trade, humans were happy to trade. If someone wanted to cooperate, humans were eager to cooperate. But if someone wanted to make humans into slaves, then humans had a different response entirely. He went on to describe what would happen if the Council tried to implement their slavery proposal. Human colonies throughout the galaxy would immediately declare independence and begin preparing for war. The human military, which the aliens had dismissed as primitive, would begin targeting alien installations and supply lines. Human ships would start attacking alien vessels wherever they found them. But most importantly, Jake explained, humans would not fight this war according to the civilized rules that the aliens were used to. Humans did not wage war to make political points or to gain negotiating advantages. When humans decided that something needed to be destroyed, they focused all of their energy and resources on destroying it completely and permanently. Danny spoke up again to mention that humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years and had gotten very good at it. He pointed out that while the aliens had been developing philosophy and art, humans had been perfecting the science of killing things efficiently and in large numbers. Amy added that humans also had the advantage of numbers. While most alien species reproduced slowly and carefully, humans made new humans constantly. Even if the aliens managed to kill millions of humans, there would always be more humans to take their place. The aliens, on the other hand, could not afford to lose even a small percentage of their populations. Jake waited for this information to sink in before continuing. He explained that humans had not wanted this conflict, but they were perfectly prepared for it. The choice was entirely up to the Galactic Council. They could treat humanity as equals and potential allies, or they could try to make humans into slaves and discover what humans were really capable of when their survival was threatened. The chamber had gone completely silent. The aliens were staring at the human delegation with a mixture of shock, fear, and something that might have been respect. They had thought they were dealing with primitive creatures who could be easily intimidated and controlled. Instead, they had discovered that they were facing a species that was willing and able to fight back with devastating effectiveness. Speaker Veltar finally found his voice and asked Jake what exactly humanity was demanding from the Council. Jake's answer was simple and direct. Humans wanted full membership with complete voting rights. They wanted to be treated as equals, not as servants or junior partners. And they wanted an immediate apology for the insults and threats that had been made during the session. The crystalline being asked what would happen if the Council agreed to these demands. Jake smiled for the first time since the session had begun, and somehow that smile was more frightening than all of his threats had been. Jake's smile was not a pleasant thing to see. It was the kind of smile that predators wore when they had cornered their prey and were deciding exactly how to finish the hunt. The aliens in the chamber seemed to recognize this expression on some instinctive level, even though they had never seen it on a human face before. He told Speaker Veltar that if the Council agreed to humanity's demands, then humans would be happy to share their knowledge and resources with the galactic community. Earth had developed some interesting technologies during their rapid expansion into space, and many of these innovations might be useful to other species. Jake mentioned that humans had created new methods for faster-than-light communication that did not require the massive quantum entanglement networks that most aliens used. Human engineers had also developed more efficient fusion reactors and improved methods for terraforming difficult planets. These technologies could benefit everyone in the galaxy if they were shared freely between equals, but Jake also made it clear that cooperation was a two-way street. If the aliens wanted access to human technology and resources, they would need to treat humanity with respect and recognize their rights as an independent species. The days of condescending lectures and dismissive attitudes were over. Danny Rodriguez stepped forward to add his own perspective on the situation. He explained that humans had been watching the galactic community for months since first contact, and they had noticed some interesting patterns in how the established species interacted with each other. The security chief pointed out that many of the so-called advanced civilizations seemed to have grown soft and complacent over the centuries. They had become so focused on philosophy and art that they had forgotten how to fight effectively. Their military forces were designed more for ceremony and intimidation than for actual combat. Danny went on to explain that humans had been analyzing the defensive capabilities of various alien species and had found them surprisingly weak. Most alien ships were built for comfort and efficiency rather than survival in combat. Their weapon systems were often outdated and poorly maintained. Their military personnel seemed to view their service as a social obligation rather than a serious profession. Amy Walsh joined the conversation to mention that human intelligence services had been mapping the locations of critical alien installations throughout the galaxy. She casually mentioned that they had identified the main power generation facilities, communication hubs, and supply depots for dozens of major alien civilizations. She explained that humans had learned long ago that the most effective way to win a war was to target the enemy's ability to fight rather than just their frontline forces. Destroying a civilization's infrastructure was much more efficient than engaging their military in direct combat. The aliens were becoming increasingly agitated as they listened to this casual discussion of their vulnerabilities. Several delegates were frantically trying to contact their homeworlds to warn them about the human threat. Others were demanding that station security arrest the human delegation for making terrorist threats, but Jake was not finished explaining the new reality to his audience. He told them that humans had also been studying the economic relationships between different alien species and had discovered some fascinating weaknesses in the galactic trade networks. Many alien civilizations had become completely dependent on imports from other worlds for basic necessities like food, water, and energy. If these trade routes were disrupted, entire planets could collapse within months. Jake mentioned that human raiders could easily target cargo ships and supply convoys, bringing galactic commerce to a complete halt. He went on to explain that humans had another advantage that the aliens had not considered. Unlike most galactic species, humans were used to operating in hostile environments and making do with limited resources. They could survive and fight effectively even if their supply lines were cut or their bases were destroyed. Jake told the chamber that human military doctrine was based on the assumption that they would always be outnumbered and outgunned by their enemies. This had led them to develop tactics that focused on mobility, surprise, and striking at weak points rather than engaging in direct confrontation. Lisa Grant finally spoke up from her position at the podium. Her voice was calm and professional. Again, but there was steel underneath the diplomatic politeness. She explained that humanity had not wanted this confrontation, but they were prepared for it if the aliens insisted on treating them as inferior beings. She pointed out that the human delegation had come to the station with genuine hopes for peaceful cooperation and mutual benefit. They had been willing to start as junior members and work their way up to full status over time. They had brought gifts and offers of friendship that would have benefited everyone involved, but the aliens had chosen to respond with insults, threats, and proposals for slavery. They had made it clear that they viewed humanity as nothing more than a convenient source of labor and resources. This attitude was unacceptable to any self-respecting species, And humans were no exception. Lisa went on to explain that the choice was now entirely up to the Galactic Council. They could recognize humanity as equals and enjoy the benefits of cooperation with a dynamic and innovative species. Or they could continue to treat humans as inferiors and discover what happened when they pushed a warrior species too far. Speaker Veltar's crystalline form was flickering with nervous energy as he tried to process this completely unexpected turn of events. He had presided over council sessions for centuries, but he had never seen a situation quite like this one. The towering crystal being asked, "Jake, what guarantees humanity could offer that they would honor any agreement reached with the council? After all, if humans were as dangerous as they claimed to be, what was to stop them from attacking alien civilizations even after gaining membership in the galactic community?" Jake's answer was simple and direct. He explained that humans had no interest in conquering or destroying other species unless those species threatened humanity first. Human expansion into space was driven by curiosity and the desire for new resources and opportunities, not by a need to dominate others. But Jake also made it clear that humanity would defend itself against any threat with whatever force was necessary. If the aliens wanted to test human resolve, they were welcome to try. But they should be prepared for the consequences of their actions. The chamber erupted in urgent discussions as delegates frantically consulted with their advisors and tried to contact their home governments. The casual confidence of the human delegation had shattered their assumptions about the balance of power in the galaxy. After nearly an hour of heated debate, Speaker Veltar called for order and announced that the council would vote on humanity's membership application. The vote was unanimous in favor of granting humans full membership with complete voting rights. Councillor Zephan, whose scales had turned a sickly green color, formally apologized for any misunderstandings that had occurred during the session. He explained that the council had simply been testing humanity's resolve and had never seriously intended to propose slavery. Jake accepted the apology with the same calm smile he had worn throughout the confrontation. He thanked the council for their wisdom in recognizing humanity's potential and expressed his hope that this would be the beginning of a long and mutually beneficial relationship. As the human delegation prepared to leave the chamber, Jake made one final comment that would be remembered in galactic history for centuries to come. He said that humans looked forward to working with their new alien partners, and he hoped that everyone had learned something valuable from their discussion. The lesson was clear to everyone in the chamber. Humanity's polite mode was a choice, not a weakness. And when that choice was taken away, the galaxy would discover what humans were really capable of when they stopped trying to be nice.